Hello and welcome to DisruptED TV presents Dismissed, a podcast about expat life, entrepreneurship, and education. As always, I'm your host, Jeremy Williams, at jwilliamsedu, with two very special guests this evening. Had a third guest, but unfortunately this timing didn't work out as it's in the middle of a school day. But I'm really glad to be joined by Sydney Atkins and Tia Luker-Putra. Tia and Sydney, welcome to Dismissed. How are you?
Hey, Jeremy. Good to be here.
Great to have you. Thank you so much for joining me. Tia, first off, let me thank you because it is late. I mean, by old man standards, this is very late for me. I try to get my kids to bed at 7:30, and so it's 10 o'clock right now in China, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so we won't go too long tonight, so don't worry. Sydney is an administrator in Al Ain, down the road from me. I'm at Manor Hall School, and he's just around the corner. And Tia is a classroom teacher in China who has been on the front line of COVID-19 kind of from the start. And it's like, we'll start with you, Tia. It's been like living through your posts and your tweets because you're like 2 months ahead of us in every sort of way with this, because all of this kind of started earlier where you're at in China. And so I've been seeing your sort of like life starting to return to normal posts, and that's been very encouraging during this time. So why don't you just introduce yourself and maybe tell us how in the world you ended up in China, and then we'll talk about what your experiences have been like so far with these unprecedented times, as everyone likes to refer to them.
Yeah, my parents call it the special time. I've been teaching in China for 6 years. And I taught in Korea for 2 years previously, and then wanted to come back to Asia after the 2 years in Korea. So then we went to British Columbia and then came to China to kind of have a new experience because we didn't want to repeat Korea, but wanted something new. So we came out here. So I've been here for, like I said, 6 years. And we've just been kind of dealing with what's been going on for the last few months. And yeah, that's kind of the short story.
Yeah.
Jeremy, we lost you.
We lost you. You're muted.
I'm muted. It's a short story to start, but we'll get into it. It's pretty incredible to see you kind of run the race ahead of us right now, and to read about the experiences as today was your first day back in school. I saw in your blog post that you posted yesterday. It's a really timely opportunity to have this chat. Sydney, why don't you introduce yourself, how in the world you ended up in the UAE, similarly to Tia, all three of us being expats on this.
So interestingly, I ended up in the UAE right out of college. I was a fresher. I was 22 when I first joined school in Dubai. And the day I landed, interestingly, was the day KHDA announced the school inspections. So it's your fault. Sort of. So I like to believe that I've had the vantage point of being in a school that didn't have a system like that in the first place, to working with the changes that came over the last 10 years. So it's been interesting. And over the last 2 years, of course, I've moved down to Al Ain, where I work as vice principal of the GEM school here. So it's been an interesting move from Dubai to Al Ain. I think culturally, the two places are so different. In terms of work, the two places are so different, and the challenges are different as well. So
it's a great point. So for those of you that are non-UAE familiar, the UAE is comprised of 7 emirates, the biggest being Abu Dhabi. And at the very, very end of the Emirate of Abu Dhabi is the city that both Sydney and I reside in, called Al Ain. It is approximately an hour and a half from Dubai and from Abu Dhabi. And so a couple of years into my stint here, Sydney joined the Al Ain community, and we became colleagues pretty quickly after. I think it was like the day or two after you got down here, we started talking. So it's really great to have you on, Tia. So talk to me about what January and February were like for you as all of this goes on. You are one of two, actually 4 educators that I know that are in China. I know the Inspire Citizens guys, and I know I have a friend named Luke who is in Guangzhou. So can you just talk to me about what you experienced at the start of this in January, and just walk us through, until it hits at a worldwide level with the global pandemic?
Right. So we were in the United States. We were in Seattle seeing my wife's family during Chinese New Year because we had Christmas holiday starting at the end of December, and then we had 2 weeks back, and then we had the Chinese holiday. So we went out to the U.S. to visit family, and then we that's it was about the 20th around there where things started to come up on the news that this was happening in China, and we started to get a little bit worried because we weren't sure what was going on and was it a big deal, was it being blown out of proportion, and so we thought, okay, well, let's get closer. My school wanted us, all the staff to be closer because we weren't sure what was going on, and I'm the only Canadian at my school, so people from the UK are living much closer. So we thought, okay, well, why don't we just go over to Thailand, have a nice week there, and we'll see what happens. And so we went to Thailand, and every single day it just kind of got worse and worse with more on the news. All of our colleagues and friends were emailing and WeChatting, which is similar to WhatsApp, and spending all of our time checking it, getting on that John Hopkins website, seeing what the numbers were doing in China. And it just kind of escalated in this kind of way that nobody really realized, because we just thought, oh, we'll just go to Thailand for a week and it'll blow over. And obviously that did not happen. And so we thought, well, we've been away for almost a month now, so let's try to go back to China. And at that point, it hadn't gotten really crazy here yet. So when we came actually through the border, it was really easy. The only things were that, there was guys in hazmat suits everywhere. When we landed in Shanghai, we had to kind of wait for a while, and we weren't sure what was going on. And the next thing we know, there's guys in hazmat suits at the front of the plane, and they're waving people from the back of the plane to the front of the plane, and they're bouncing off everybody who's standing and waiting to get off, including myself. And then we realize, oh my gosh, these people have had some sort of temperature or something going on our plane. And that became a very common experience for a lot of people coming back, because we did come back earlier than a lot of other people did. But we were fortunate in that we kind of got through borders, got home. All the flights that we had taken, yes, people were wearing masks and were wearing the big ones, and everyone was covered in plastic. Some people went as far as to cover themselves in garbage bags, and having the gloves on and all that. So then when we got back to China,
where are we at time-wise right now in terms of, is this January still? Are we in February? Where are we?
In February. So we got back, we were supposed to come back the 5th of February and ended up back about a week and a half later. So mid to later February. And so by that point, we had been doing daily news, daily check-ins with everybody all day long. And it got to the point where we came home simply because we were just sick of trying to maintain what was going on and sort out what was happening. So, yeah, so we came back, and being back was fine for us. But then after we came back, the quarantines just got more serious. They started really requiring people to do quarantine. There was about a 2-week time where they were taking people directly from the airports and putting them into government quarantine. A girlfriend of mine got caught for 4 days, separated from her husband. Another girl got separated from her child, and they were in government for, one was about 4 days. They had no idea when they were going to leave. One was, she was in for 18 days in government quarantine, and you just didn't have a choice. They did the best they could. People just didn't know what was going on because there were so many people they were trying to deal with. And then at that point, they shut the borders, because that only went on for about maybe 2 weeks, and they just couldn't sustain it. So then the borders shut down. And so ever since, everybody who's out is out. So I've got several family, like we call ourselves family, because of course, as you guys know, living overseas, you build your own kind of family unit here. And they're trapped in other countries and are just waiting now to see if they can come back.
So Sydney and I both being in the UAE, Sydney, so Tia's going through her timeline, talking about January. I'll start with my January, and then I'll let you talk about your February. In January, I was actually back in the United States getting ready to come back with my family. And to your point, Tia, around wanting to get back to see what was going on, we were in a similar situation because all of the Iran stuff was flaring up. And so I had family going asking if it was safe for us to go back. And frankly, it's very different. It's kind of jarring, and I don't know what the media is like in China, but I don't have TV. You know, I don't have a CNN affiliate here that I watch or anything. In fact, I don't watch any news on the TV here. I get everything just through typically online. But we were trying to figure out, what is it safe? What's going on? Should we come back? Should I just come back? Should the families, like, we were going through and running all these scenarios, and we landed on just coming back. So then, you know, I'm coming back early January. Sydney, I want to say that end of February stuff starts picking up here for us. You recall kind of what was happening from your perspective at that point?
Yeah, I think by February we had a lot more information to deal with, and having seen the situation evolving around the world, I think many educators here at the UAE were sort of preempting what some of the first steps would be. So by middle and end of February, I think because of the nature by which all of us just collaborate and, you know, talk to each other, and, you know, the WhatsApp groups that we have, you know, the ideas and the thinking behind what we could prepare for was already emerging. And I'm going to say we're lucky to be living in the UAE because the government's response to what was going on was very transparent. So even right up till when it was all official and decisions were actually made and announced officially, you know, there were feelers, there were surveys being done, there were questions being asked, poignant questions to school leaders. So we could almost anticipate what some of the next steps would become and preempt those decisions and then deal with it ourselves. So I think by middle and end of February, we had a lot more information, we had a lot more insight, and we were beginning to see how this would play out.
Yep, and there was a moment, and I don't know if it was in late February or early March, where all of the principals in Abu Dhabi, the entire emirate, got summoned at like 3 p.m. that day. So it was like 10 or 11 in the morning, and all of a sudden, people were getting, we have this WhatsApp group with all the administrators in Abu Dhabi in the private schools, and everyone was like, I got my call. And it was like 1 o'clock, and I'm like, I haven't gotten called about anything. And I mean, the school next door, and our schools Sydney and our school are literally on a road called School Road. There are 65 schools all on this street. It's like being at the Gold Souk or the Spice Souk. It's like schools everywhere. And everyone but me had gotten this call. So they contacted us. We were the furthest away. They contacted us like, you know, an hour and a half before the meeting. So I'm flying down, I'm not flying, I'm driving responsibly down the road, Abu Dhabi Al Ain Road, to get to this place. And it was, again, to Sydney's point, lots of questions, lots of what would be some of the, the challenges that you would have as a school, how much technology exists within the school's infrastructure, how many families don't have technology. So it wasn't announced that we were going to be closing down school and doing remote learning, but it didn't take a rocket scientist to connect the dots and start to figure out that they were really starting to do the due diligence and homework of figuring it out. And I think unlike, my country, they were looking at a lot of the models in East Asia and figuring out what had worked. The UAE was looking at Korea and was looking at China and the things that were working and helping to flatten the curve and get things to be back to normal. So what is it? So from that point, Sydney, what happens from then until where we get to schools being closed?
Just to add to what you said, I think some of the questions that we were asked were really important. We work with so many assumptions. Just the question on technology. Does every child have access to internet? Are there enough devices in every household? What happens in families where there are 4 or 5 siblings? Do each of them have an iPad themselves, or do they share a common device? So I think it gave us time to reflect on a lot of things that we didn't already know or hadn't thought of, and we're able to preempt, some actions that we could take in response if and when a school closure would take place. But I think after that, we moved into a phase of much more clarity. There were policies put in place. I think the UAE government has been lauded for being in the top 10 in terms of leadership, in terms of dealing with the COVID response. So there were policies put in place, there were guidelines put in place. And I think the open communication helped a lot. So it wasn't just a set rule that you had to follow, but the government, the regulatory bodies sought active feedback from principals and school leaders on how they felt, challenges that they might face with rolling out plans that were preset for them. So I think by the end of February, moving into March, I think we had a lot more clarity. Every school was, I know there were some points where we felt that we were rushed to present a plan or a contingency plan, but I think it forced us also to think quicker than we would have. And so by March and by middle March, we were definitely well prepared to take on whatever decision came our way.
Yeah, and to kind of jump on that and go a little further, I think that for us, and I don't know how it was for you and your school, Tia, but for us, it was like what we found ourselves doing is in the first week, just surveying parents every single day to get the dosages right. Like how much work is the right amount of work? What percentage of our parents are working from home? And therefore, like that led us to go asynchronous and not have live lessons because our parents were saying, we're working at home. It's really impossible for us to stop our work at 9 a.m. and do 45 minutes of English. Like we would much rather pre-recorded lessons where we can work with our kids when we have the time. So there was a lot of this sort of like build, measure, learn, really short iterative cycles going on of trying to figure out for our community, like what was the right approach to this because, it was, the economic impact was immediate. I mean, there were people having their salaries cut in our school, and the way that typically our schools are the fees are paid on a trimester system, and it was right at the beginning of term 3. So, there were a lot of schools that didn't have huge cash reserves who were in big trouble financially because parents couldn't afford to pay. The UAE government started a scholarship program pretty quickly after they went in. But what they ended up doing with us was they moved our spring break up 2 weeks from when it was originally calendared. We have all the same spring break time. And then they give us, they said like, we're not canceling spring break, but like use this as time to get ready. And then those 2 weeks were up. Then we went into the remote learning with all of us feeling like we had a pretty good plan to start. Tia, what's been your experience like in terms of like, quote unquote, getting it right in terms of what works for your parents, your students, and your community in your school?
Sure. We did the same in the sense we weren't quite sure what to do at first. At first, it was posting videos. It was all the different platforms using Seesaw and Zoom and which one was the right one and using IXL, trying to give enough but not too much. And then, well, we started off with just the videos, and then I guess we decided that live lessons were going to be best because, the school my wife works at, they've been doing videos. Our school opted for online live. So I was doing 3-4 hours a day of live lessons where the kids would do a half-hour lesson. So I'd have an English block of an hour, and half of it would be half of my class, and the other half was the other half because I personally found it a lot easier when I had half of the class in a Zoom lesson, and then I was able to kind of serve their needs a lot better than having 20 kids looking at me and trying to sort out what they needed. So having half that was a lot easier. So we did a lot of in the first maybe week, and then after that we were pretty solid for the rest of the time. There was a few like add-ins or a few changes here and there with Zoom changed their security, so we had some things that we had to switch around there. We switched into paying for Seesaw, things like that. So it was just kind of trying to improve the processes that we had started with after doing a bit of that testing the waters. So once we started that, then it was a lot easier. And they did the same thing where we switched around a few of our holidays. We gave up some of our holidays to try and, balance it out a bit. But I think we stayed on the mark as far as what we needed to cover for as far as curriculum goes. So there was a lot of stuff that we were doing, and I think some people found it overwhelming. For the children, but then at the same time they kind of just got into the same grooves as they usually would. So I think the fact that it wasn't just a month and it was 3 months, they got used to it, and they got into. In the end,
that was part of it with you. Is like I think it was you. I can't remember for certain, but you were. I want to say what week is this for you now in terms of if 17. You were still remote learning? 17, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so we're at week 10. right now.
Yeah.
So you were 7 ahead of us. So I was seeing some of the things you were posting and other educators in China about how the fatigue hits in, the isolation hits in, the student apathy, teacher apathy, the overwhelmedness, because those idiosyncratic aspects of your life and your routine, once you're stripped from them, maybe the novelty of all of this for, in the short term, you can kind of like push past it. But then, as it starts to grate on you a little bit, so you were ahead of us. So I remember looking at some of the things you were talking about around attitudes of children and kind of how people were feeling, how you were feeling, and going, because I would say, I don't know how you would feel, Sydney, but like I feel like after the first week, things were okay. Like we had figured out the right delivery method, and we kind of wrapped our head around it and our hands around it, and like felt like we had a good plan. Families were they were accessing learning. They were contacting us if they had issues, but the fatigue started for me, I would say around week 3, week 4. And the financial situation of some of my families went from bad to worse to worser. They started to be without income for a longer period of time, because initially, I think for us in Abu Dhabi, it was a 2-week nighttime lockdown with no non-essential work during the day. So Sydney, what about you in terms of like over time? How has the fatigue and like the isolation of quarantine hit you both personally and professionally as this has gone on?
So like you said, Jeremy, I think week 1 of the program of remote learning was quite hassle-free in many ways. I think schools in the UAE are lucky to have the advantage of well-established digital ecosystems. So, it's not new to us, it's not novel to us, but I think the implications of using it for longer periods of time was something that we were not prepared for. So we didn't foresee, fatigue and things like that till we had gone through week 1 and received feedback from both staff as well as parents, as well as children. So that's when we realized, we've got to think deeper and we've got to think more long-term in terms of how we plan. So I think where the isolation is concerned, it's been a pretty challenging one for us. We have all our teachers at home, and we decided quite early in March to keep them home and not have them come into school. I think many schools took decisions at different points in time. It didn't happen uniformly. There was no directive on when schools should shut. It was left to decisions and the discretion of the principal. So we decided early that our teachers would stay home and teach from home, and children would learn from home. And the 2 weeks off gave us time to plan for it. But I think that didn't filter down into all industries and all companies. So we still had teachers sitting at home, working from home, but their spouses going out to work, older children having to go out to offices. And even currently, that's still something that is really challenging, because a teacher's mental state is only as good as how safe and secure she feels where her family and her children and her spouse is concerned. So I think currently that's something that we are still struggling with, to motivate the teachers whose families are still working, having to go out. A large percentage of our parents are healthcare workers or working in industry that haven't completely shut down as yet, and they need to be there and have a physical presence. So that's our biggest challenge currently.
Yeah, I would say my wife would say one of my most, I have plenty of annoying characteristics, but the one that's the most annoying is I'm Captain Brightside of everything. Like I'm always the one who finds the positive in the situation. So for me, it was like, we have a baby that's almost 1 year old. I'm never going to get the opportunity to be this involved in my children's education again. I have one that's 6, a boy that's 6 and a boy that's 4. And so I was able to find the opportunity, the positive of this. However, capital H, however, holy cow, the amount of frustration as a parent that I was having trying to get, as I watched my son's motivation wax and wane with the e-learning. There'd be days where I could get 2.5 hours cranked out, no problem, with my 6-year-old, and we were making great progress. And there were other days where, like, literally getting him to pick up the pencil was really, really tough. And so I felt it both from the parent perspective and from the school leader perspective. But the thing I want to ask both of you is, one thing that I realized very quickly into this was how much of the work I enjoy as an extrovert of getting that energy from other people and the daily interaction with my bus drivers and my front desk receptionist and my parents that would come in the day and every day and say good morning. And for me, I could not be a lifetime remote learning principal. I could not run a virtual school and be fulfilled and feel like I'm enjoying myself. So what have been kind of the takeaways from you before we move into Tia's big day today? I want to hear all about that and your experience coming back. But like, how has it been for you to lose that sort of that stickiness between the relationships that you have in the school with all the different stakeholders that you see on a daily basis? And has that been a really jarring adjustment for you? I'll have Tia, you start first.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think when I'm thinking about the dates, I was saying 17 weeks, but I guess we had Chinese New Year in there, so maybe it's closer to 50. But I think you kind of, like I said, get into a groove of it. Even when I saw the kids today, I said to them, I saw you guys on Friday. You know, we've been seeing each other this whole time, but it was definitely different because the energy is different. You know, that's what you miss as a teacher. Like, I really am all about project-based learning and being hands-on and doing all that kind of stuff, and taking that away is taking all the fun stuff away, you know, and just putting in kind of the most basic stuff you can. So all I was doing every week was trying to find a new and creative way to use breakout rooms or to get them to do projects. This past week, I said, you know what, let's just do something totally different. And we decided to do a STEAM cardboard home challenge, because I usually every year do a science fair, and I've been doing science fairs for this should have been my 7th year, and we couldn't. So I thought, okay, well, how can I do it? So we did that instead. And so the kids got together with their families and made these incredible cardboard projects. I even got the teachers to do it. I made a solar oven and cooked cookies, you know, just trying to do something different so that it was getting them away from the computer, getting us as teachers away from the computer, and actually being able to do something different. So it was good that I was trying to find other ways to engage my students, whether it would be in English or math or in science, but also just trying to give that energy back to what we were doing, because usually, of course, in the classroom, you give that energy to the kids and give it back to you by their excitement. But it's hard to see that when you don't actually see them working on stuff, and you've got about a half an hour lesson when you're saying, okay, I'm going to review it, or I'm extending it, and, you know, trying to just do something different with it. So I think that was the thing I missed the most, was definitely the energy and being able to see different kids and having all those extra kind of bits that you usually have. So I definitely was sad to miss that. I had a group of girls that I was starting an SCG podcast with, and we were ready to do our first podcast after like 2 months of preparing, and we've never gotten to be able to do that. So, you know, that kind of stuff kind of...
it slowed everyone down. I mean, and it's taken away things that ordinarily we wouldn't have thought twice about. It has made us all a little more urgent. Sydney, same question to you. What are some of the things that you really miss about being in school physically, and some of the takeaways you've had?
So I think I echo what Tia just talked about, all the things that Tia said. You know, that makes up such a huge part of what we do on an everyday basis. And I think the pandemic has, of course, impacted every industry and all sectors of life, but it's so much more exponential where teaching learning is concerned, because it's so important to have that social gathering, that meeting, the ability to interact with people on a physical basis. And I think for me, in terms of being an administrator, I realized how important, you know, those hallway conversations are, just bumping into people by chance, you know, running into a person and having a conversation quickly where you've, you know, exchanged ideas, you reminded them about something, or just chatted with them about their day or their family. Because you can tell people a lot of stuff through emails and conversations and Zoom calls, and it might not have the impact that you intended for it to have. And I think the reliance we have intuitively on, you know, body language and facial cues, which gives us so much insight into how a person is thinking, how a person feels about something you just said, or an idea you threw at them. You know, that's so incredibly important to us as leaders, because we get to know people and we understand how people work because of those things. And not having that has been a huge impediment in terms of, you know, planning for such long-term implications of what we're experiencing, and not knowing really how people actually feel about it, or if they have reservations, because you can't see them, you can't talk to them, you can't really engage with them like you normally would. So one of the things I did to remedy that, because not everybody likes to write an email about a problem they're having, but I use the chat feature in MS Teams very informally. So I call it my hall room chat, where people just don't worry about the rules of email etiquette and things like that. It's just a place where you could say, hi, how's everything going, what's happening with your family. And I think that's relieved that to some extent, where people are able to talk about things informally, in a way that they would do in a staff room setting or in a hallway conversation. But that's my big takeaway there. Jeremy, I think I lost you.
Yeah.
He'll probably jump back on.
Yeah. Can you hear me, Sydney?
I can hear you, Tia. Yeah.
Okay. No, I mean, while we're waiting for him to come back, I just think it's really meaningful that you tried to do something like that. I know you're saying it doesn't necessarily fix